Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 10, Episode 117. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thank you for being here this Friday, Steelers Nation. Dave, how you doing?
Happy Friday the 12th. How are you? I'm doing great. And where were you 14 years ago today when Ben Roethlisberger had his motorcycle accident?
I'm trying to think. I think I was on like a family vacation in Maryland, I want to say, or something. And I just saw the photo. I think WTAE or somebody had the photo of the bike. I didn't realize how much damage there was in that accident until I saw that picture again.
Yeah, let's see, it would have been, how old was I? I would have been in my late 30s, I think, at the time. So
what were you doing?
I was in front of a computer, I think.
So not much has changed the last.
Yeah, my life has pretty much stayed stagnant here for the last 14 years. I remember following a lot of it on social media, I think.
I mean, how much of a talk was it? Because obviously there was no Twitter back then.
I forget how information was shared so quickly.
So you were on Facebook or like forums, message boards?
It might have been message boards or whatnot. When was Twitter created? It seems like
it was around like 2007, 2008, and it may have existed in some small form, but I don't think it was really used by. You didn't have a Twitter account back then, did you?
When did I get on Twitter? I don't even know when I got on Twitter initially. I might have had other. I think I had maybe just a generic account. I didn't know really. I think that's when it was kind of the dawning of when I found out how kind of useful Twitter could be, maybe. Okay. Because I think doing a lot of internet searches trying to keep up with the news is it RSS feeds were real big back then. Where you could get kind of up to the minute, up to the minute when a new news story would hit on a certain site. So I know I used a lot of RSS feed trackers back then. That's probably what I remember most about it. And it seems like I was on Twitter, and that was probably where I started to realize how good Twitter could be, I guess, with some of this breaking news. I don't think I had the Steelers Depot account set up at that time, but I think I might have been following along on just a generic account or something.
Gotcha. Yeah. So what do you remember about that? I mean, I guess everyone's reaction was just, "Oh my goodness," I just remember, and bits and pieces would seemingly kind of break like every 30 minutes, I think there, but just knowing right off the bat, I think the seriousness of it, that this just wasn't him, little fender bender type thing, and obviously, kind of messed up his face. You really wondered at the time, was he ever going to play football again? Right.
That was kind of the initial concern from what I remember there was, what a time for this to happen, and not only just wondering about the season that was at hand, but if he'd ever play football again.
Yeah, it certainly is a wild one. So cool to, in a sense, to go back and revisit that, and in hindsight, knowing that he was okay and ultimately played again, to go back and check that out is certainly a reminder. We got a good show for you guys today. We will have Dr. Melanie Friedlander in about 40 minutes or so on this show, talking a variety of things, including Ben's elbow and his recovery and rehab in progress, and talking about COVID and how that's going to impact the lay of the land, because that has been the news pretty heavily. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes with the NFL and the preseason. But Dave, I want to start today's show with some Steelers news. Mike Hilton and Matt Feiler have both reportedly signed their second-round tenders. They were restricted free agents this year. This was kind of a no-brainer decision. Hilton reportedly still wants a long-term deal, as he did last year. Ultimately did not get it. I'm not terribly optimistic things will change this year, but Hilton Feiler will be playing under the RFA tag at worst in 2020.
Yeah, and I think really it's more newsworthy because A, I bet a lot of people didn't even know that they hadn't signed their tenders yet.
Right.
B, just because it was kind of so late, there's nothing going on in the news cycle. That makes it newsworthy, I think on top of it there. But ultimately not a surprise, not really that newsworthy. I mean, it was bound to happen because, look, back in April was the deadline for them both to sign offer sheets with other teams as restricted free agents, and obviously neither one of those guys received an offer sheet, and not surprising, being as how they were both given second-round tenders at the time. I think the biggest thing, biggest reason why you are seeing them sign them now, not that the Steelers would have done this, but June 15th is the deadline this year for teams to withdraw qualifying offers to restricted free agents and still retain the exclusive negotiating rights by substituting what's called a June 15th tender of a one-year contract at 110% of the player's prior year paragraph 5 base salary, with all other terms of his prior contract carried forward unchanged. So they could have technically, if those tenders weren't signed, replace those tenders with, lower value tenders.
Mm-hmm. And for Hilton, that would have meant like, what, $800,000 or something?
Yeah, I think both of them really, for the most part. I mean, look, what were both those guys last year? Like $660 or something like that?
Yeah, $670, something like that. Yeah.
So whatever the 110%. Over that, of that would have been kind of their new replaced tender. Once again, not that the Steelers would do such a thing, but you never know. You're given that tender. You're allowed to kind of shop yourself through the first part of the preseason there and see if you can get an offer sheet. And obviously the deadline being several months ago. And I understand, not signing it from, say, the middle of April and, until now, because maybe you are trying to negotiate and have a little bit of leverage for a new deal. But I think we all kind of knew, for most of this offseason that neither one of those two guys were going to get a new deal this offseason, at least not this early, and especially in light of the pandemic and everything, along those lines. So it made sense for them to get those things signed by June 15th, and they have done so. Now, the official signing transaction, whatever you want to call it, did not come across on the official NFL sheet on Thursday, so I assume that will come across on the sheet today before the weekend there. So, yeah, look, these guys, we'll see what happens, and not surprising that Rosenhaus's camp came out and said, look, we're still hoping to get a long-term deal, but I think the reality of it is right now, and especially in light of what all has happened with the NFL and the pandemic and kind of the uncertainty right now as far as maybe the salary cap goes moving forward past this year, and just a lot of other factors. I just don't see either one of those guys getting deals.
Yeah, I don't either. You're only going to give extensions and long-term deals to slam dunk guys like Cam Hayward, like TJ Watt potentially, maybe Dupree, but that's even stretching it because you just have so much cap uncertainty going forward. I guess the question is, what do you think the odds are that this is the last year for Hilton and Fowler? I imagine you think they're pretty decent of happening.
Yeah, and I think we kind of covered that, didn't we, not too long ago, kind of going down the list of guys. I think best case scenario for both those guys, Hilton and Feiler, is to play out, their final years as restricted free agents, barring some sort of nice deal obviously being put in place, having good seasons in 2020, and then hitting the market as unrestricted free agents in March of 2021. I think, from a financial standpoint, I think that's the best thing that can happen to those two. I just don't think they're going, they would get, near the kind of money. Now, obviously, look, could they play out the 2020 season and once again get into a situation where they re-sign, after the season and before the start of free agency? Sure, that's always possible. But, if they have any value whatsoever, and are coming off of, good to relatively good or excellent seasons, then they would be foolish not to shop their wares, at least in free agency, to see what their market value is. And once guys generally get that far, unless they come back for a bargain, it's hard to see them re-signing with the Steelers personally.
Let me ask you this: who would be the bigger loss of the two to this team?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would go Hilton just because we've seen, the amount of, see how good he can be in that defense and all. Look, and that's not taking anything away from Feiler. I just think, the specialization of defensive football nowadays and the importance of having a good nickel slot cornerback and one that can even drop back a little bit. Not that you're going to do it a lot, but do some inverted kind of stuff with, and one that can come off the edge with the timing that he has at getting after the quarterbacks. And he's probably one of the better, if not the best, slot cornerbacks against the run in the NFL right now. Absolutely. As well too. So you throw all that together, and Feiler's okay. I mean, Feiler obviously hasn't, has played well at tackle the last couple of years, and obviously we'll see whether or not he moves inside the guard and how that goes and all. But I view, and really not really knowing the kind of the ceiling yet. I don't think on a guy like Cameron Sutton. I would put Hilton as the more valuable of the two.
Well, that's how I was going to rephrase the question. What if I could tell you that Sutton would be back because he's a pending free agent as well? But what if we assumed he gets re-signed? Does that change your answer of Hilton being the bigger loss at all?
Well, you still haven't guaranteed me, the kind of player that he's going to be, though.
Well, yeah, I'm not, but just based on what you know, Sutton obviously had a pretty successful 2019. I thought had a good year.
I still think. I still think if given my druthers, which one would I like to have back at least for one more year? I think it would be Hilton.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, Hilton has really come on scene, and all the things you said I agree with. My answer I might punt on, and I get to do that because I asked the question. Kevin Colbert had talked about earlier this year that Matt Feiler's position will kind of be dictated by the players around them, and I kind of feel like Matt Feiler's future in Pittsburgh will be partially dictated by the players around him, whether you're talking right tackle, what happens to Jakul McCoy if he has a big year and feels like he can be a long-term answer at right tackle, or even left tackle potentially, that may impact Feiler. Same with Banner, same with Kevin Dotson and his progress. If they feel he can be the starting left guard in 2021, that may change Feiler's equation. So I feel like it's hard to even answer the Feiler question because you're just going to have to see how the young guys step up in their spots, left guard, right tackle, in 2020, and that might, in part, at least determine Feiler's value to this team in 2021.
Look, and once again, I don't want to take anything away from Matt Feiler because I think he really has played well and surprisingly well at that the last couple years. At tackle. I mean, who saw this coming?
I think he might be one of the most underrated players by this fan base, Matt Feiler.
Possibly, but here's the thing. I still, when you look at him, he looks and smells and feels like a guard still, doesn't he, for some reason?
I mean, he played really well at right tackle last year. I know I've talked about kicking him in the guard, but he played, until the collapse at the end of the year, he played excellent right tackle.
Right, but I mean, even so, even knowing what we know and both agreeing with that statement, doesn't he just have left guard written all over him?
I mean, he played left tackle in college at Bloomsburg. He really began his NFL career as a guard. Remember, his first NFL action was at right guard, replacing DeCastro against Detroit for like 10 snaps. So, yeah, I mean, he kind of always had that conventional kick him to guard mentality, but I think he can play either successfully. I think he obviously showed we can do it right tackle 2 years ago, last year, and I think he can be a successful guard as well.
I think personally for him to be able to continue and potentially be a starter in the NFL level past 2020, he's going to have to do it at guard personally.
Why don't you think he can do it?
I just that lateral ability, and I mean he's strong.
How much has it hurt him so far? He's played
it hasn't, but I think you have to go back to and just look at overall quality of snaps and things along those lines. And he's gotten. I view it more as he's played well and kind of maximized the potential at that spot at right tackle. I'd never have viewed him as one. Look, if he gets beat, it's usually to the edge.
True.
Like that. So I don't see that improving. Okay. And look, I got to admit, I was as shocked, if not more shocked than most, that he's had kind of the seasons that he's had at right tackle. That's why I continue to say, man, he looks and smells and feels like a guard and all. We'll see if I'm wrong, but I really think his starting potential in the NFL as a starter is at guard moving past this year. And look, I mean, we still not 100% sure where he's going to play.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, week 1, where do you think he's lining up?
I mean, I think it's guard, but obviously there's a lot of things. Here's the interesting, I guess, kind of dialogue that goes along with that. All right, normally by now you'd have this team in like their mandatory mini camp, right, or pretty damn close to it, right? Yep. Which means they would have had all their OTAs right now, and. In other words, you would have had if Feiler to guard was going to be a thing, you would have had a lot of snaps doing that so far, right?
Yes, but I will say that I think that would happen regardless because last year Fowler played almost exclusively left guard in training camp just to give other guys work at tackle. So I don't know how much it really would have told you, to be perfectly honest.
Right, but I mean, I'm still, wouldn't you have liked to use a lot of your off season to get him acclimated more, even more so, to guard?
Well, I think it's more important for the young guys like Okorafor and Dotson to get acclimated to their spots. But sure, I mean, missing reps for everybody.
That's also a part of it,
Yeah, obviously, having lack of an off season hurts you a lot. Yeah, you want these young guys to be as prepared as possible for the season, so there's an impact, no doubt about it.
So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not going to clutch my pearls or anything if we get to week 1 and Feiler is a starting right tackle, but I would think that that would seemingly be a byproduct maybe of we just couldn't get those guys in there enough time to kind of get a good evaluation or whatnot. Now, obviously, the right tackle spot's nothing new to Okorafor or Banner or anything along those lines. But, look, you asked the question, and my simple answer is I expect him to be at guard. But but I'm not – I mean, once again, I'm not going to throw my hands up and say, oh, my God, where did this come from? Look, what were we talking about a year ago right now?
The conversation with Feiler was could Okorafor really push him to be the starting right tackle? That felt like a camp battle, which quickly ended. Feiler ran away with the thing, but yeah, there was uncertainty heading into camp.
And really, even kind of going into week 1, we even thought maybe Banner was going to be. Okorafor was going to be the one to dress over Banner, and we get to the week 1 inactive list, and lo and behold, it's different than what we thought.
It was a very disappointing year for Chukwuma Okorafor. Had a terrible camp. Now I think he had the shoulder injury, and he's gotten surgery on it, and he says he's pain-free. So maybe that was the issue, and it better be because he's got to play a whole lot better. And if he can't do it this year, the team's probably looking for somebody else.
And look, none of this conversation is demeaning at all to me. Is me demeaning Feiler. I hope everybody understands that.
Yeah, no, I think Feiler is as good of a story as you're going to find. UDFA from D2 Bloomsburg, gets. Houston. He was in Houston to start his career, gets picked up by Pittsburgh. I mean, has just been moved all over. He's played every spot, I think, except left tackle, the one he played in college in Pittsburgh. And the guy gets moved around so much, and he has just been the pinnacle to me of stability and consistency. And to be moved around, never really sure where you're going to play. It's been impressive. So hats off to him and the work he's put in.
Right, and look, I mean, when you go back to the two players, Feiler and Mike Hilton, both of them really deserve that, $3 million they're going to make this year as part of that second round trade. It's just one, I think Hilton got trapped in one of those situations where, you're paying some guys around him. You pay, he's just a guy that you just, would they probably like to keep him past this year? Yeah, right. Probably. I mean, he's a quintessential kind of lowbrow, keep your nose to the grindstone kind of guy, right? And good against the run and everything along those lines. You just can't find a way to pay him, I don't think.
Yeah, they haven't paid him yet because they haven't had to, because they've been able to pay Nelson and Hayden and all them. I will say with Hilton is I don't know if they 100% trust him in coverage. That's why you've seen Sutton come in and play in some of those more obvious pass situations, more so 2 years ago than last year. So I don't know if you're going to pay Hilton $7 to $8 million per year for a guy that you like, obviously, but don't view necessarily as a top tier cover corner.
What's his value? Between $6 and $8 million a season?
Yeah, that's. I was thinking about 7, splitting the difference there. I think you look at what Kenny Moore got with the Colts. That's probably a baseline that his camp's going to be working with at least. Maybe he comes in a little under that. Hard to say. Again, uncertainty with the cap this year, but I think around $7 million per year is going to be his value.
Yeah, and I just think that's a little bit too rich for the Steelers' blood.
Yeah. Any idea on what Feiler's value could be? That seems a little harder to.
Yeah, it is. I mean, especially if he's going to play tackle and start. I mean, well, starting offensive lineman in general, you'd have to think that the starting point's $6 to $7 million, right?
Yeah, I mean, you get the old Billy discount. What was that, $6 per year? That's got to be your floor, at least when talking Fowler, if you view him as a starter.
Yeah, and that's a unique situation with Villanueva because of him being an exclusive rights at the time, and he was kind of trapped, and I mean, it was good for him, but it was good for the Steelers as well,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we shall see. So good discussion there, but Hilton Fowler will be Steelers in 2020, and that has now been confirmed by them signing their RFA tenders. Dave, there
have been people that have written about both those guys potentially being cap casualties later this offseason. There's no way that's
really
happening.
I haven't even
seen it. Bloggers, but
don't disparage our good name.
Right.
Yeah, well, obviously that's nonsense and not going to happen. So is that better or worse than the Cam Hayward's going to get traded articles? I can't decide.
Oh man, just that. I mean, don't get me started on that.
Yeah, I want to get you on your soapbox.
Not that it means anything, but Bob Labriola, came out and wrote about it, after my article there as well too, and he thinks 100% chance that Cam Hayward's with this team in 2021, and I obviously. There's several ways that could happen, with I guess the franchise tag being one of those ways. But I think we both agree it's not going to be that we both agree that Hayward will be part of the 2021 team, but not on a franchise tag.
Yeah, he's going to get a long-term deal. I'm with Labs on this one. All right, Dave, NFL, or at least not the NFL, has floated the idea, I should say, of potentially shortening the 2020 preseason. Nothing really set in stone. Some ideas. Maybe it's only going to be 2 preseason games. This all comes from Tom Pelissero. So this has just kind of been some speculation and some talk so far. Obviously, this could impact the Hall of Fame game, so nothing concrete yet. But given the uncertainty of everything, the risk of exposure, and just the wacky year that 2020 is, NFL may shorten the preseason.
Yeah, the fan side of me wants all 5 of these games, Alex. Because not having, not looking like going to get the obviously the training camp access or anything. So the selfish part of me wants all 5 of these Steelers preseason games so we can evaluate. But,
and I wanted for those young guys, those fringe guys that need this time.
Right. Well, that too, But, I want to boil this down to me.
I'm with you.
And that is, I want all 5 of these games. But, the realist in me, to sit back and take a look at this thing from 30,000 feet. I mean, it just doesn't seem like this is possible. And especially, look, if, we now know there's not going to be, for sure, we've kind of known this for quite a while, there's not going to be any mini camps, all right? So these teams are going to show up and shake each other's hands at training camp.
I don't know about that. I mean, not be allowed to.
And even, I think the Steelers' scheduled date, assuming all that happens on plan, I think would be the 22nd of June. Of July. To give them enough time to prepare for the Hall of Fame game. But even so, and this is why I think you're going to see this game, a decision on this made well before the start of training camps, probably within the next 3 weeks by July 1st, I would think. It just, none of this makes sense because I think these guys are going to be behind on the conditioning standpoint. I think you're going to have to use the first part of training camp as a mini camp. As an OTA, to properly do your installs, to properly not put these guys in pads and through strenuous stuff. I think, and this is one of the things we're going to talk, I think, at great length, and we're just doctors on Twitter and not very good ones at that.
You're a doctor on TV. You're on guest episode of ER, I think, at one time.
But I mean, I think when you look at this, and correct me if you think I'm wrong on any aspect of it, I just think it's impossible to expect these guys to go right into training camp. And even if the Steelers report the extra days early and the Cowboys report the extra days early on July 22nd, to expect these teams to turn around and play an exhibition football game on August 6th, I think not having any OTAs or mini camp, I think you're asking for tons of soft tissue issues, whatever in that. And because of that, I just think it makes sense to across the board cut this thing in half, 2 preseason games per team, let them use the bulk of the training camp as kind of a split OTA/training camp, and then go from there. I don't see any other way around it.
Well, I agree with a good chunk of that, of the difficulty you're going to have with such a condensed time frame of the offseason. What I would say, though, I still want 4 preseason games. You can cancel the Hall of Fame game. That's fine. I'm leaning toward just cancel it permanently anyway, because it's only played like 50% of the time this past decade anyway at this point. But I think
it's really stupid. I mean, but to play it. But I mean, I get it, and trust me, nobody's going to be more disappointed if it gets canceled with the Steelers playing in it this year than me, right? Because it's what I do, right? It's what we do.
I hear you.
I mean,
especially without camp. I mean,
right? It's what we do. But go ahead.
But I think having the 4 preseason games, that's going to give these players the opportunity to improve their conditioning. If you only have 2, 1 game for starters, basically 1 game for backups, that's just not much time for those guys to actually get conditioned. That's the best way to go through it. And yeah, there's going to be a potential risk of increase for soft tissue injuries and stuff like that, but that's going to happen in training camp anyway. That's, if you're playing football in stadium in practice, you're going to have that risk. You're still running. Your body doesn't care whether it's a game or not. So I think you need those 4 preseason games to let your young guys, let your new guys get acclimated and get used to the system and have those important reps. To lose those reps in a year where you've already lost your offseason is going to be even more detrimental to all those guys. And I think getting the chance to play 4 preseason games will give them the chance to be in better shape than just 2, where they're realistically playing in like 1.5 of those games, and they are going in pretty cold to the regular season.
Do you view that as fair to all involved?
To play 2 or 4 preseason games? Yeah, I think it's, of course, I think if it's the same for everybody, if everyone's playing 4 games, then I think, yeah, it's fair. But I think you need those games. You need as many reps as possible to get in shape, to have as many reps, to learn the system, to teach your system, and all those things. So I think 2 would be even more harmful. And just for clarification, we have not talked to Dr. Mel yet. She's going to be on with us here in another about 10, 15 minutes or so. So we're recording this before we talk to her. And these are one of the topics that we're going to talk to her about. Which side of the fence do you think she's going to be on with this? I'm not sure. She does have an article out on Steelers Depot that you guys can check out. The doctor is in giving the NFL training facility a checkup. I'll be curious to get her thoughts, though. She can be the tiebreaker, I guess, because maybe we're both on different sides of this thing.
Once again, the fan side of me wants 5, but give me 4, I'll be happy. I just looking at it and the fairness and all, and boy, some of these COVID stipulations and all going to be interesting for teams. John Harbaugh, I think we got an article up by Matthew Marksey this morning. Stemming from some quotes from John Harbaugh of the Ravens when he was on the radio talking about some of these things and all like that. It's just going to continue to be a very, very interesting offseason, right?
It is. And the other concern with just 2 preseason games is maybe that insidious nature of the NFL of, well, there were 2 preseason games in 2020. Let's just have 2 in 2021 and then there's 1. And that's kind of their way to sneaking into really limiting these preseason games that I think are so important for these young guys to have these rookies, these back of the roster type players that need this opportunity to find, for example, the next Mike Hilton. I mean, how are you going to find the next Mike Hilton if you're just not getting these reps in? It's going to be really tough for those guys to succeed.
Yeah, and you want to get a good look at these guys on special teams, and we've seen time and time again guys make the roster on that final preseason game, right? Because of special teams play,
Rosie Nix,
and really not continued special teams play, not just kind of one game, but
sure.
This is a guy that or guys that have poked their heads out throughout the preseason for one reason or the other, and specifically special teams, and you give them that one final game to make their mark, and they do. But everything about what the NFL does from at least a 4-game preseason game standpoint, I like, because of the selfish aspect on my end, on the fan aspect. Now, if
they want to get rid of it, that if they had their choice.
Right. Now, if I was a player, I'm sure I'd say to hell with this. Unless
if you're a vet or a rookie.
Right, unless I'm an undrafted free agent, out of Bloomsburg.
Right. Then you want as many reps as possible.
Right.
No player gets screwed over as much as that, undrafted, back end of the roster, futures contract type player, because in a year like this especially, and I understand why they've had to cancel everything, I don't argue with that, but in a year where there's no offseason, no minicamp, no rookie minicamp, training camp could be limited, preseason games could be limited, and the rosters are expanded a little bit, but my God, these guys just have no chance.
So just to recap, just so everybody knows, as we are right now on this Friday, what is today, June the 12th, the Hall of Fame game is still scheduled for August the 6th there, and I would think you have to have a drop dead date for this because of people and reservations and all like that, right? So you would think that would be at least a month out from the actual game taking place. So I would think we'll know for sure, at least I would think that we know for sure by, July 1st or thereabouts.
Yeah, and again, I think, and I'm really in favor of cutting these things, but I think you just get rid of the Hall of Fame game entirely. 2011, it was canceled due to the CBA lockout. 2015, that was the poor field conditions. Sushi blew out his knee. The field conditions have been an issue in a lot of these games that have even been played. 2016, it was canceled outright because of poor field conditions, and there's a chance it'll be canceled this year because of the coronavirus. So kind of just not even seeing the point. Just have the ceremony, have that, and don't need to have the game anymore.
Boy, are we going to get sports back at some point here? Because it's still, the NHL came out and said, it still feels so far away,
Mm-hmm. It does, yeah. I mean, I know baseball is making the slowest of progress towards something. The NBA seems to be in a good spot. The NHL at least has a plan in place. So it's going to be a little while. And for football, what I would do for preseason, I would say preseason, no fans for the NFL. And then once you go regular season, it's probably going to be like 50% capacity at least to start is my guess. I think that's how you handle the fan situation.
How do you decide the season ticket holders who gains access and who doesn't?
I'm glad I don't have to. I'm glad that's above my pay grade because that's a good question.
And I have a feeling that they're just going to open the doors and let people in, as many people as they want in.
For week 1 of the regular season. What about preseason?
Maybe not preseason, but and we're still obviously a couple months away. What is it, like 80 or 80 something days, 94 days or something like that?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, that's honestly that's still quite a while.
Yeah, it's a lifetime.
So, a lot can change, but we'll see. We'll talk to Dr. Mel a little bit more about that.
And we'll talk to her in a moment. Before we do that, though, Dave, you're continuing to do your Big Play series. You're in, 2006, at least in stuff you've posted, I believe. So you're kind of getting the more Ben era. I love that play you just posted, batch to Heath Miller. I didn't realize that Heath Miller almost certainly did not get in the end zone on that play. And then I didn't realize it, so you went up to Nick Saban, who was the coach of Miami, which is funny to say, threw the challenge flag, but the refs just never saw it and just ignored it, basically.
Yeah, the one of the good things about this, especially for someone I think my age, is you remember, but you don't remember.
I just assume you remembered them all. You're doing this series off of memory at this point.
No.
You got that long-term memory thing.
I do, but, as my wife says, it's a selective memory. For some reason, some things stick, and I can't tell you why. A lot of these I remember them in nature, in probably not so finer details, I guess you would say. Some of them I really didn't remember, to be honest with you. The fake punt, the Miller to Chris Hope. For some reason that one just escaped me.
I didn't remember that Hope scored on that play. I just thought it was a long completion.
And boy, what about the blocking at the end of that? And what about the people on the field at that time? You had Troy Polamalu as the up back personal protector. Hope obviously on one side. You had Ike Taylor on special teams, and Ike Taylor, what a vicious block that was towards the end. Really, it wasn't even needed at that point, but he certainly gave it. I tell you another one and this was probably on purpose that I had removed from my memory because of his short. Really, this was his highlight of his Steelers career. Kent Graham to Hines Ward for 77 yards against the Bengals in 2000. Also, I had problems recalling, and unfortunately, it's one of the few that I don't have the actual footage for, the Richard Huntley rumbling 52 yards against the 49ers in 1991. I obviously remember Richard Huntley. I remember all the buzz about him at that time. I can't envision the actual play. Now, all the Cordell Stewart stuff, I remember the big plays from him, and obviously now we are in the Roethlisberger era, and I'm remembering quite a few of those. I got a very interesting one for everybody today that I think they're going to want to make sure that they tune into the site for.
Richard Huntley, there's a name we don't talk about too often. Last Steeler to score a touchdown at Three Rivers, if my memory serves me correctly. A little trivia question there. So yeah, fun series. What's give me a teaser for this one that you just teased.
Hold on here and let me. It's one. I'm trying to figure out the best way to tease it. Santonio Holmes is involved, and then obviously It's an offensive play, and
it's not a punt return.
No, it's not obviously not a punt. I'm only doing offense and offensive line.
Okay, gotcha.
But I think it's one that'll jog people's memories here.
Yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. So looking forward to that. All right, Dave.
We got a lot of defensive players assembling. I'm assuming in Pittsburgh, which is obviously good to see. I mean, a slew of them, man. I mean, you go down the list of defensive players there. I think a few rookies even in this group as well too. So that's obviously good to see. And I think the further we get along in this, I think we both agree, man. The Steelers are going to be in a great position because of coaching continuity and because the amount of guys they've got coming back from this 2019 on both sides of the football.
Absolutely. You've been saying this for a long time, Dave, that every team has to deal with this adversity. It impacts each team, but the Steelers are more well-equipped and better equipped to handle a year like this than almost any other team in football. So, yeah, I think in that sense it gives them a leg up.
All right, we'll have a few more topics on the other side, but I guess it's a good time to break and get the great Dr. Mel on, right?
Yep, let's talk to Dr. Melanie Friedlander and get her take on everything medical related. We'll be back after the break. And welcome back to the Terrible Podcast. I have a very special guest on the show today. It is Dr. Melanie Friedlander, general surgeon from Torrance, California, our medical expert for the Steelers Depot website. She has an article today. The doctor is in giving the NFL training facility a checkup. Dr. Mel, how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me join you.
All right, we have so much to talk about here today. Obviously, we want to touch on the NFL and COVID-related stuff and all the policies that are implemented, and that's basically the gist of the article you wrote, kind of evaluating what they have to say and how practical it is. We know that Harbaugh, the Ravens, said that it's really going to be hard to follow those things to the letter, but I'm going to start with Ben and his situation. I know there isn't a whole lot of an update here medically. I think the last time we've talked, we've seen him throwing NFL passes and all those things. Is there any sort of insight you can give us on his timeline of his rehab progression and what are the maybe final hurdles he has to clear through his rehab these next 2 months or so?
So first, I just have to say how impressed I am with his recovery so far because he's already exceeded my expectations. I mean, the video of him throwing passes with his wide receivers that I guess it was Switzer posted
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he just looks like he's in regular preseason form there. I was very impressed. So I would say that Ben is definitely on track for, doing everything he would normally do in training camp and preseason. The question is, how rusty is he going to be? But the good news is they'll know that. What I never realized until I started reading about Ben's injury is that the NFL currently uses footballs that have microchips in them. And so they can track the velocity, spin, and speed. Velocity and speed, of course, being the same thing, the speed and spin of the ball. Mm-hmm. And so they can check that data for what Ben is doing now compared to what he was doing in, say, 2018 when he had that monster season. And that's going to be incredibly valuable information. So if they see that he's not able to get the same velocity, they'll know they need to slow him down a little bit. Or if he's able to get the same velocity with ease, then they can just, move forward, all cylinders firing. So they're going to have good feedback and information as he progresses. But from what we're hearing now, and of course they're always going to make it sound good, but from what we're hearing now, I would say we should expect to see him 100% for training camp.
Wow. Do you buy into the notion that Kevin Colbert has floated that Ben could be better in 2020 from a physical standpoint now that he's maybe pain-free for the first time in a long time?
I actually do. And here's why. I don't think that Ben had a sudden injury. I think that this was a lingering injury that probably was going on for at least one season. I mean, he said in several interviews that he had pain in his elbow for years. Mm-hmm. And we only know one fact for sure. The one fact we know about Ben Roethlisberger is he had surgery. The Steelers have been insanely secretive, annoyingly so, about this injury, about the surgery, about what exactly he had done. In sharp contrast to, say, for example, the Saints, when Drew Brees injured his hand last year, the Saints were completely forthcoming. They announced what the injury was. They drew diagrams and posted links explaining what surgery he was having. I mean, they were extremely transparent. The Steelers, of course, being in the cloak of secrecy. Mm-hmm. So we don't know much. Here's my educated guess. I think he had micro tears of his flexor muscles in his forearm. And those are muscles that attach to the medial epicondyle, which is the bottom of the humerus, the bone that goes from the elbow to the shoulder. So it's basically where the forearm muscles attach to the bottom of the upper arm bone. And muscles, of course, attach to bone with tendons. And if you have chronic wear and tear, the tendons tear a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and that gives you pain. It might not be pain that limits your function, but it's pain that's debilitating. And one of the most common treatments for that type of pain is a cortisone shot. I'm not talking about taking steroids by mouth. I don't think Ben did that, but it's very common for trainers to give cortisone injections or steroid injections into the area where the pain is, A, to treat the pain and also to settle down the inflammation. The side effect, of course, is that can cause even more damage to the muscle. And so I think that this was a progressive problem with Ben that occurred over time to the point where it finally came to a head in that second game of last season where he just really couldn't control his throwing motion and he couldn't deal with the pain. So because I think this is a progressive problem that was going on for at least 1 year, if he's really pain-free now, Colbert could be right and Ben could be better than ever.
Dr. Mel, this kind of goes off of what you just said or covered there. I just want to kind of clarify. We still don't know for sure exactly what kind of surgery he had. There's still people out there, I think, speculating, saying, okay, it was Tommy John surgery or it was this surgery or whatnot. I understand that you're obviously not going to say exactly what it was. I mean, you just said what you think it may have been. What is the difference between, say, Tommy John and what you just described?
Well, I don't think Ben had Tommy John surgery for a couple of reasons. Number one, this happened a long time ago, but the team actually announced before Ben's surgery or right after it that it wasn't Tommy John surgery. It was one of the few pieces of information they ever gave us. So I have no reason to think they're lying. If that's true, he didn't have Tommy John surgery. Also, there was an interview at one point where Ben described his surgery as they fixed 3 tendons, or they repaired 3 tendons. And again, that goes along with my sort of educated guess or speculation that he had this sort of medial epicondylitis or this micro tears of the tendons. Ironically, it's sometimes called golfer's elbow. Not that I think Ben got this injury playing golf.
Oh,
it is a wearing.
don't give people ammunition on Twitter now.
I think I just did.
Yeah,
sorry,
that's right.
But it's sort of the opposite side of the elbow is tennis elbows. A tennis elbow is when this occurs on the outside aspect of the elbow, and a golfer's elbow or lifter's elbow is when it occurs on the inside aspect of the elbow. And the ulnar nerve is a nerve that runs down the inside of the elbow and gives sensation and motor function to part of the forearm. Well, part of the sensation is in the ring finger and the small finger, and you can get numbness there. And again, Ben did describe numbness in those areas. So, but going back to my earlier comment, he said that he had 3 tendons repair. Remember, ligaments attach bone to bone. Tommy John surgery is a ligament repair. It's the ulnar collateral ligament, the UCL. And they actually take a tendon from somewhere else in your body and use that to recreate the ligament. One of the more common ones they use is the palmaris tendon, which if you sort of move your wrist backwards, you can see that tendon kind of come up on the forearm going onto your inside of your wrist. They also sometimes use a tendon from the leg. So the Tommy John surgery is using a ligament, using a tendon to replace the ligament in the medial elbow. If you are actually repairing tendons, which is what Ben said he had, tendons attach muscle to bone. So again, that goes along with the flexor muscles attached to the bone. So if he had 3 tendons repaired, well, you happen to have 3 flexor muscles in the forearm. So again, that goes along with what he's saying.
Okay, now inevitably when you talk about Ben's arm or elbow and surgery, and you're especially talking to a Steelers fan that's been around, about as long as I have, the topic of Terry Bradshaw and kind of the elbow injury and surgery or whatnot that he had back in the 80s there comes up, and people want to draw a parallel between the two, and thus the worry becomes, oh, well, we see what happened to Bradshaw. That was the quick beginning of the end for him. From what you know about, can you kind of recap what we think or the surgery Bradshaw had, and the injury that he had in comparison or not in comparison with Ben?
Sure. It's very possible that Terry's original injury, because he did have 2 actually, his original injury may have been very similar to what Ben experienced. Now, obviously, there's not a lot of detailed information about that, and unfortunately, there was no Steelers Depot to, shift through all the mystery back then. But when Terry describes his original surgery in his most eloquent way, he said they sewed a bunch of muscle back together. So again, not a ligament injury. And so it does sound again like the muscles in his forearm were repaired. And that does make me think that it was a similar injury to what Ben had. And interestingly, when Terry describes the symptoms he was having back then, and I've looked at some of the older interviews, from the early 1973, 1974 as well, he talks about not only pain in the medial elbow, but he talks about numbness in his fingers and trouble gripping the ball. So it's very possible, without any confirmation available out there, that Terry's injury was in fact very similar or identical to what Ben experienced last year. The difference is that Terry never had an MRI because they weren't doing them back then. And so we don't have confirmation of that. Back then, orthopedic surgeons were making diagnoses with just plain x-ray and physical exam. But also, they didn't have the sophisticated rehab programs that we have now. And so Terry had a surgery, and in a lot of ways he was on his own. And once he felt better, he just started throwing the ball. But I don't think he ever did this cautious, gradual acceleration of physical activity. As soon as he felt better, he just went through the football as often and as far as he could. I think that caused his second injury, which was the ulnar collateral ligament tear. And he has also mentioned in interviews that he felt that if he had the Tommy John surgery after he felt that tendon pop, instead of just observation, he might have been able to return and play for a number of years. What's interesting is that he saw Dr. Jobe, and you'll know that name from the Curl and Jobe Institute in Los Angeles, a great orthopedic program. He saw Dr. Jobe not that long before Jobe did the first Tommy John surgery on, of course, Tommy John in September of 1974. But by then, Bradshaw had made the decision to retire.
So it could have been called the Terry Bradshaw surgery.
Exactly. It could have been the Terry Bradshaw surgery. It came close. Probably just by a matter of months.
So give me the timeline again on Bradshaw, because wasn't it in like 83 or whatnot, that he had the surgery for, what was it? Well, I'm trying to look at the article right here real quick of what the actual injury.
Oh yeah, you know what? I'm sorry, I got my decades wrong.
Okay, right.
This is what happens when I talk to you guys before I've had my coffee. Bradshaw is 83, not 73.
Okay, so and Dr. Bill Bundrick, according to an SI article, had diagnosed the ailment as reverse tennis elbow micro tears of the flexor pronator muscle, which is located on the inside of the elbow.
Right, which is exactly what I think Ben had.
Okay, and when did the other injury? Did the other injury happen after this or before this? What you were saying with him possibly needed the Tommy John, and I'm talking about Bradshaw.
Yeah, exactly. So Bradshaw had his surgery, I believe, in March of the off season, and when he came back for training camp, was still having enough pain that he didn't feel that he could play. So they actually sat him out, and I think that was the season they had the strike, wasn't it?
You're talking about the one for the micro tears of the pronator muscle, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Sorry if I wasn't clear.
That's all right. 82 was the strike, wasn't it? Was 82 the strike, Alex? 82?
82, 84. I don't know what year it was.
You know what? You're right. Oh, I'm going to get killed by Steelers historians today. So the strike was the year that his arm was hurting him.
Okay.
And he got through with a bunch of cortisone injections. And so it was the strike season shortened that he managed to muddle through. And I think that was a season where they lost in the playoffs. Sorry to bring up painful memories. And so it was in that offseason. Dave, you're totally right. Thanks. So it was in that offseason that he had a surgery. And
did something happen after that then, is what I'm getting at.
After 82?
I mean, after 80, after he had the surgery in 83. I mean, obviously we know that he came back. So what you were talking about, the him possibly needing the Tommy John surgery, was way earlier in his career. Is that correct?
No. Tommy John was at the very end of his career. So I think, and sorry if I wasn't clear on this, he basically muddled through that strike shortened season with cortisone injections. He got his surgery, which he describes as, they sewed the muscle back together, but the orthopedic surgeon in Shreveport, Louisiana, described as repairing micro tears on the flexor muscles.
Okay.
And so he came back. So that surgery was in March of the off season. When he came back the following season, he didn't play until late in the season. I think the Steelers.
It was against the Jets, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah.
It was against the Jets, and the season was on the line. They needed to win that game to get to the playoffs. And so Terry was like, put me in, coach. And he actually played quite well for most of the game, and then heard a pop in his arm as he completed a touchdown pass. And that pop was his ulnar collateral ligament tearing. So that was a different injury that occurred the season after his surgery.
Okay. Gotcha. So you really,
he had two different problems.
You really, and then that ultimately, you think, had he not had that second injury against the Jets, because he only played the one game in 83, and in 83, I think the off season before the 83 season is when he had the surgery, right? The other surgery there. You think, had he not had that second injury, that he had been able to play maybe a couple more years then, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or if he had gotten the Tommy John surgery, he could have come back, right? Because he just decided to shut it down.
Well, it's funny when, I think if he'd had the Tommy John surgery. So what happened with Terry Bradshaw is that he tears his UCL, and then he goes to doctors, and they say, he goes to Dr. Jobe and says, well, you can do, sort of physical therapy and watch it and see if it gets better, or you can do surgery. And I recommend just watching it and seeing how it goes, which Terry Bradshaw then did. And fortunately, he never got better. So he shows up the following year at training camp, and he's still having pain. He can't throw, and he tells Coach Noel, I'm done. And that was it.
Mm-hmm.
So had he had the surgery at the end of that season, he probably would have been good to go the following season.
Do you think there's any sort of overcompensation or whatnot played into maybe Bradshaw in that? And is there a fear now with assuming Ben's recent elbow surgery was the same as the one that Bradshaw went through in 83 or whatnot? Is there a fear of? I guess is there any correlation or causation? I don't know. That would lead one to worry that Ben could damage his UCL coming off of this particular type of surgery. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is I don't know. The optimist in me says that the rehab process is so much more sophisticated that it shouldn't be an issue. The challenge, of course, is that we don't have a lot of data on this type of surgery and repair as far as NFL quarterbacks go. So it's a tough question to answer.
Where are you on the concern meter of 0 to 100 about Ben Roethlisberger and the 2020 season?
Well, I'm a homer, so I have zero concern. I think it's going to be amazing.
Okay, good.
No, but in all seriousness, I'm actually not that worried. Okay. I think Ben's going to be great. I obviously in Los Angeles, my practice is not really all that far from Dr. Eletresh. And so I know a lot of surgeons that work in his building that know him well, that may have given me a little background information. No HIPAA violations, of course. But from what I've heard locally, I think the surgery went really well. I think there's every reason to be optimistic that the rest of his elbow is fine, and he actually should be fantastic this season.
Just to recap, and we'll move on to another topic here. You don't think Ben had Tommy John surgery. You think Ben had a surgery similar to what Bradshaw's original surgery was back in 83, I guess, and no reason for there to be kind of a correlation between Bradshaw and Roethlisberger, outside of only just the kind of surgeries that they both had.
You just said that far more eloquently than I ever could.
Oh no! Don't! You give me way too much credit here. They look. They had to kick me out of high school. But okay, good deal.
I think that's a really fair summary.
Okay, those are a lot of things that we kind of look. I'm only a groin specialist, but really those are a lot of the questions that I've had throughout this process, and then also a lot that we get, from the doomsayers that said this is the same thing that Bradshaw had, yada yada. So I think you really cleared up a lot of information there.
Dr. Mel, I want to transition. Go ahead, Doctor. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I hope I helped with the muddy waters. Someday in my fantasy world, the Steelers are going to be transparent about their players' injuries, but not this week.
No.
Not as long as Mike Tomlin and Kevin Colbert are running the show. I want to transition to what's happening in present day. The NFL has released a set of protocols. Now, to be clear, the NFLPA said that they have not agreed to those terms, that players don't necessarily have to follow them. There's still nothing mutually agreed upon, but the NFL has released their protocols for the 2020 season. It's a lot there, a lot to go over, Dr. Mel, but just kind of overall, just to hit you with the big question, of the protocols the NFL is recommending here for how to conduct locker room, strength and conditioning, and all that stuff, what is going to be the hardest thing for teams to actually follow based on the NFL's directive?
I think the social distancing is going to be the biggest challenge. You know, just the short version of their policy is they're actually mirroring in many ways what we're doing in hospitals right now. And that made me really happy. A lot of it is just evidence-based and common sense. So there are a lot of medical studies coming out that show that wearing masks and social distancing and cleaning your hands are the three most important things to prevent transmission of the virus. And I will tell you that I've been operating throughout the entire pandemic. I am thrilled to tell you that not a single member of our nursing staff in the operating room, not a single doctor or anesthesiologist has gotten COVID from being in the hospital. And probably that's because we clean our hands constantly, and that's just the culture in the operating room, even when you're not scrubbed, and we're all wearing masks all the time. So the NFL policies actually mirror a lot of what we're doing in the hospital. Screening people when they come in the front door, just, take their temperature with a non-contact thermometer, ask them the basic questions about whether or not they might have symptoms, limiting foot traffic, limiting large numbers of people in any one space indoors. Because it seems like indoors is a much higher risk than people being together outdoors. Mm-hmm. But I do think that the social distancing and keeping people separate from each other is going to be very, very tough.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think it's well-intentioned from the NFL, but there is a bit of absurdism in the idea of, okay, these guys are going to play games, they're going to go practice and be in the trenches and literally be right next to each other during practice, but you get in the locker room, you better keep your distance. It just kind of feels a little silly given the nature of football.
Well, I hate to say silly because we're trying to keep our guys healthy.
Sure.
But I think it's going to be extraordinarily challenging. Now, full disclosure, in the operating room, we are not practicing social distancing. Right. I mean, it's impossible. I'm standing across the table from my surgical tech. My circulating nurse is right there. The hallways in the operating room are not that big. And so, that's, I would say, one thing where we fail. Now, the difference is we have to be there to provide health care. Football players don't have to be in the training facility and they don't have to play football. But I think if they're using all of the other precautions and they're not always 6 feet apart from each other, I'm actually not so worried about that. And I don't want to send a message out to people that social distancing doesn't matter. I know we're all tired of the stay at home and being careful. It's mentally exhausting. It's still really important. But is it the most crucial piece of the players getting back into the facility? I actually don't think so.
But my question is, and this isn't fully really addressed by the NFL yet, but I almost am certain that it's going to be a problem they're going to run into, and you're seeing that in college football, and even the Penguins have had a player test positive who seems to have recovered. What happens whenever players inevitably do test positive during the season? How do you think the league's going to handle that? Will that player just have to quarantine? Will the team have to quarantine? What do you think is going to happen there?
It's a great question. When the pandemic first began, the concept was that you have to quarantine for 14 days if you've come into contact with someone who has COVID. And that actually changed in the middle of March, in the early weeks of this whole outbreak. And so then it became, if you've been exposed to someone who has COVID, then, just try and be careful, use precautions. And of course, I don't, want to stir even more fires with, the confusion that we've gotten from the CDC, the confusion that we've gotten from the World Health Organization. But as far as what do I think the NFL will do about this, here's what I would do if I were a team trainer or a team doctor. If you've got a guy in a facility who develops symptoms, obviously you're going to test them right away. And if they come positive with COVID, that's where contact tracing is so important. You figure out everyone who is in contact with that individual player for, say, the last 5 to 7 days. And all of those players get tested for COVID. And then you watch them for, the next 5 days, because 5 days is usually the earlier part of the incubation period. Mm-hmm. Do they have to stay home from the facility? No, but you might want those players to take extra precautions. You might really strongly encourage them to wear masks even when they're in the weight room. But I don't think you quarantine people for 14 weeks just because they've been in a room with someone who actually tests positive. The good news is that the difference between now and last March is we have so many more tests available. So back in March, even in the hospital, if a doctor or a nurse had symptoms, they would just send that person home. At one point, the hospital had no tests, and then eventually they had like 12 tests per day for the entire hospital.
Wow.
So no one was getting tested. You just had to assume that they were positive, send them home, let them get better. Now we have tons of testing. It's not enough testing that we can use it indiscriminately. They're not going to be testing players every day at the doorstep. But if one person gets symptoms and is positive, they can immediately test the folks that were in contact with him that day without a problem. And I think that's going to be a key.
Mm-hmm. Dave, any questions on what Mel's talking about written?
No, not from that aspect. I want to kind of focus in now. Look, we know that there's no OTAs, no mandatory mini camp this year. That means everybody's going to show up at training camp in July, shake each other's hands, and get after it, so to speak. We've seen so far the NFL has not canceled any preseason games. There's talk about it getting cut in half to potentially 2 games per team. Let me start with a question this way. How concerned are you about there not being an off-season program in any, other than virtually, obviously, and then guys all of a sudden showing up at training camp and getting after it? I guess in so many words, what I'm asking is, should the first half of training camp be treated almost like OTAs, so to speak, maybe 10 days worth of practices, even the first 10 days or so, and I know that's quite a bit, or at a minimum 7 practices, be kind of treated almost as if they were non-contact, not full speed OTA practices. Yeah, that's the first part of my question. The second part is, Throw your fandom aside. I told Alex before you got on, the selfish fan part of me wants all 5 Steelers preseason games this year, but the realistic side of me thinks that 2 is probably the proper way to go. Where do you weigh in on that?
I know that this is going to break Alex's heart if we drop to 2 games, because it makes it so hard for the rookie and the undrafted free agents and the fringe players to really make their mark. But I think fewer preseason games is 100% the safer, smarter way to go.
Dr. Mells, breaking my heart.
I know.
Well, look, it hurts me too. Look, at least he normally gets to sit out there and watch these guys, and I know he doesn't get a chance to do that, but a guy like me who's not out there watching every throw or every rep too, I depend a lot on what my eyes see. I depend a lot on what Alex, reports, but then the other part of me watches a lot about what happens during these preseason games. I'll watch these damn things 15 times each, going through them and then looking at the charting and stuff like that. So yeah, look, the fan side of me definitely wants to see 4 or 5 preseason games, but I really think, and you agree, Dr. Mel, that probably cutting them in half is the right thing. And do you think that's what ultimately is going to happen?
I really do. I just think there's too many reasons not to rush into the preseason. You stated it great. I mean, these are professional athletes. They're going to come into camp with a high level of fitness. We've seen them on their Instagrams and their Twitter accounts showing that they've been working out throughout the entire off season, but it's not the same as football shape. And we know it's not the same as game shape. And we see that time and again when players are coming back from injuries. So I do think they need to ease the players into training camp a little more carefully this year, because they want them to make it through all 17, because it's now 17 weeks of the regular season. You don't want to sacrifice the season because you wanted more training camp or more preseason games. So I agree. I think the smart move is ease the players in, and again, this is a whole new world for them with all of these new regulations. And the coaches are going to be a little uncomfortable. The players are going to be a little uncomfortable. They're going to be figuring this out as they go. Because one other thing you have to keep in mind, whatever policies or protocols the NFL makes, the teams are also going to be creating their own policies on top of that, because the coaches want to keep their players safe and the players want to be safe. I mean, these guys care about playing. They care about winning. They also care about their families, and they definitely don't want to be putting their families at risk.
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, I was going to say that's a fair point. But, I mean, how do you get players conditioned? Because as you said, and I agree, Dr. Mel, that, yeah, you have to ease into this thing, but football shape and working out at your house are two totally different things. And so I feel like you need those preseason games to get in the best shape possible for that long season. If you don't do it now in the preseason, you're going to pay the price for that during the regular season.
Your point is well taken. I mean, obviously, I don't think anybody knows the answer, but if you're going to try and keep your guys separate, your practices are going to look different. Your reps are all going to look different. I think the coaches don't even know yet. That's the problem.
Right.
I don't. And listen, when the NFL came out and blasted the league, right after this new policy came out, I think that was mostly a power move. That was saying, hey, we want to get our say. And it's entirely possible when they look at this, they'll sign off on it.
Sure.
But I think that they're all figuring this out on the fly, and we don't even know what training camp's going to look like yet because the team has no idea. So I could be totally wrong. They may play all 5 preseason games. I personally never understood the point of the Hall of Fame game. I know that's sacrilegious to say.
I said it earlier in the show, so you're not alone there.
But I mean, that one, kick it to the curb right away, especially because I don't want our guys having to put themselves at risk. When I think about and this is a tangent, I apologize. When I think about the Hall of Fame ceremony getting changed, it breaks my heart because of Polamalu. I don't want him to have any less of an honor and experience because there's a virus out there, and that's tough. So when I say cancel the Hall of Fame game, I don't say it that lightly. I just think in terms of the players playing in it, it's always been an extra risk. It's always been extra wear and tear, and I don't know that it's a benefit to the team.
They could maybe still have the induction ceremonies and all, but just cancel the game. Or another thing, that I think they've discussed is maybe pushing that back to the same as a centennial class celebration, just having one giant, which would result in maybe more attention being put on guys like Donnie Shell. By having those at later, maybe you can make one kind of 2-day event or something out of it later where everybody gets their due and it works out good for everybody. But I mean, obviously that's yet to be determined here. But I think going back to kind of the conditioning thing, don't teams normally break camp like right before their second preseason game, Alex? If they have in that, usually what happens is it before the second preseason game that they normally break camp?
Yeah, it's either before or after. I forget which, but it's before the third preseason game for sure.
Right. I know it's. Well, I want to say that teams generally break camp right before, if they only have 4 preseason games, right before 2. So technically, even though kind of, I guess, quote unquote, training camp continues on for the final couple of seasons of the preseason, couldn't you essentially just kind of push everything back and still call it, or still have kind of a training camp, quote unquote, like schedule? The next 10 days after you would normally break camp.
Yeah, I think you could do that. Again, I think like Dr. Mells said, it's a lot of unknown. It's a lot of logistical things to figure out. I don't know if we have all the answers to that right now, but I'm sure they'll have to come up with a plan pretty soon.
I will say that soft tissue injuries in training camp are not the most common injuries in terms of the glaring ones that we see. So, yes, it's a concern, but let's keep in mind, these are professional athletes. They're experts at their own fitness, and I do think that they're going to come into this with an understanding of how best to navigate their new schedule.
I worry the most about the young kids. You could tell these rookies all you want. Mike Tomlin does every year after rookie minicamp or after OTA, saying, you guys better be in shape come time, training camp. You just don't know what it's like. And then they get, all of them, most of them probably think that they know, but once they get to training camp, they don't know it. It's like the pigs don't know pigs stink. You don't know what you don't know sometimes. So I think that's my biggest concern there.
Oh yeah, to be sure. I'm way more worried about the young guys because it is like drinking out of a fire hose for them. So I do worry about the young guys in terms of their fitness level, in terms of their understanding of expectations and what they need to do to perform. But when I think about, putting a team out there week 1, the rookies aren't my number one concern. I want to make sure that our veteran guys, our starters, are good to go.
Alex, what did we say we wanted to ask the great Dr. Mel next? Have we gotten through all of them?
Well, I had one last question, and again, no one knows the answer to this. This is an especially tough question because it could vary state to state. What about fans? Obviously, a lot of Steeler fans attend these games. Dr. Mel, what is your expectation for fans being there at games for the regular season?
I definitely think it's a possibility. When they were talking about having fewer fans in the stands, that was always confusing to me because how do you decide which fans get to go and which don't? I mean, there's such a high volume of season ticket holders for the Steelers games. If you let all of them in the door, I don't know what that means for the number of bodies in Heinz Field. I can tell you that a friend of mine who has season tickets, got her bill on schedule, and that when she specifically asked the team, how do I know if I'm going to be able to go to the game or not, they had absolutely no answer for her. So I think we're going to have a couple litmus tests before that. I mean, NASCAR is already letting fans attend their races. And so I think we'll have information on that. As chaotic as the protests have been, we will get valid information in a couple of weeks about whether or not that causes a spike. I am cautiously optimistic that it's not going to be that significant because, again, I think outdoor congregations of people is probably not nearly as significant as when it's indoors. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a real chance that we will see fans at the games.
But aren't we seeing a spike recently in COVID cases in Arizona? I think other states have seen that spike. Is that going to give the sports world pause?
Possibly not. I think that has a lot more to do with Memorial Day weekend and people really letting their guard down.
Okay.
It's a little too soon for a true spike from the protests.
Yeah, I'm not even just saying to the protest related, but just overall the general spike of cases as businesses open up, economies open back up, that may create that. Basically, I'm asking is that second wave going to happen where we're kind of going to take steps backward?
Oh yeah, I mean we're there already. You look at California and Texas, and they're already having more cases per day than they ever have, mm-hmm. and that unfortunately is part of opening the economy back up and opening stores and opening, restaurants and things like that. The key is, can people be smart about it? And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole on this podcast because that's not why we're here today. But I think that is where you're seeing the spike, and I don't think anybody was ever confused that was going to happen. The question is, how well can we handle it?
Right.
But I do think when you look at fans in stands outdoors, I do think that's a separate issue. And I'm not even sure that being in a dome makes any difference. So I think that for some of the sports that are already allowing fans to attend, that's going to be really helpful information. And who knows how much contact tracing states are doing, because whatever they're doing, they're collecting data on their own. They're not publishing it yet. But supposedly that's happening in California. Supposedly they had contact tracers trained and ready to go starting about a month and a half ago. So we may get more updates at that point. But given that it's outdoors, I do think that having fans at games is certainly a possibility.
I hope so.
Let me end with this, and it's kind of generic. I know it's not your overall specialty, but of course you are in the field and you talk and know those in the healthcare industry, and because of that a lot more and have probably privy to a lot more information, or are privy to a lot more information. Long term, just in general with the coronavirus here, 6 months from now, a year from now, what is the expectation, speculation, just in general? Are we going to have a vaccination? Is this going? When is it going to be okay to not go to Walmart and wear a mask? Kind of thing. Just your overall thoughts. And look, I mean, obviously, I know we're still learning more about this every day, but just kind of what are you hearing, and just your overall thoughts on that long term here.
We're living in an unprecedented time of scientific progress. And so for a science nerd like me, it's actually some excitement and some positivity coming out of a very dark situation. So we've got more scientists in the world working on one single problem than we ever have had, at least in my life, if not in the last 100 years. So there are at least, I think, 5 or 6 different companies who are making incredible progress on vaccinations. And at least 2 of the companies are already in human trials right now, which is so fast I can't even tell you. I mean, normal vaccine production is 12 to 18 months. And here we are identifying the coronavirus in November, December. It hit the U.S. in February and March hard, really. And we're already looking at having vaccines by the end of the year. It's just so remarkable, I can't even tell you. So if we have a vaccine by the end of the year, will that vaccine protect every single person? No, I mean, most virus vaccines don't. They protect enough of the population that it's safe to, freely roam about the cabin. So assuming that we have an effective vaccine available by the end of the year and it can be mass produced, which the companies are already preparing for, we could have some sense of normalcy by, who knows, the winter or spring.
Okay, so in other words, and by vaccine, I mean, is this the type thing that you would get if you got the virus, or would it be sort of like the equivalent of getting a flu shot?
The equivalent of getting a flu shot, exactly.
And would you think this is something that that people would need to do annually, or would there be, or do you think this is a once a 5-year kind of vaccination, or what?
That's a good question, and the short answer is it depends on if we see that this virus is mutating. So far, it looks like it really hasn't that much. It's called a coronavirus. I don't want to get too sciencey on you. It's called a coronavirus because it has these little crown-like appendages on the outside of the actual virus. And that part of the virus doesn't seem to have changed at all since they first identified it, or not significantly, which means potentially the same vaccine could work year after year after year, which is different than the regular flu shot. The regular flu shot is a little bit of a crapshoot. They base it on last year's streams of viruses and, make the vaccine each year based on that, which is why it works, but it's not perfect. So ideally, should everyone get this vaccination? Yes. The answer is yes. Is it going to keep every single person from getting the virus? Probably not.
Okay, but fierceness aside, so hopefully by about Christmas time, we're not having to go to Walmart and wear a mask.
I'm not going to say Christmas. I'm going to say late winter, early spring. But who knows? Listen, Dave, when this thing first hit in March and we were looking at what the potential damage can be, I had no idea what to expect. And while there are things that we're all not happy about right now, a majority of this country is alive and well. And that's a good place to be in June. So who knows? I mean, could we be back in Walmart without masks by December? Anything's possible.
All right, great. Alex, anything else? Boy, we got our money's worth today, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Very thankful for your time.
I've been your ears.
There's this pain. I got this pain in my ankle again. No, really maximize my what. I wonder what our copay is for this, Alex.
Yeah, the phrase "billable hours" comes to mind for this podcast. So, Dr. Mel, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it and hope to talk to you soon.
We are so blessed.
Thanks
Dr.
for having
Mel.
me, guys, as always.
All right, thank you, Dr. Mel.
Right, stay safe. And welcome back to the Terrible Podcast. Our special thanks again to Dr. Melanie Friedlander, a general surgeon in Torrance, California. You can follow her, and please follow her on Twitter @GirlSurgeon. Her insight, Dave, is always appreciative, and it is just blows me away how much she's able to blend the medical side with the sports side of things.
Yeah, look, I mean, you get fan Melanie, you get Steeler fan. I mean, really Steeler. She keeps up with this, as much as the rest of us here on day to day talking about the team. You get doctor, you get a surgeon. I mean, you get a lot of things all rolled up into one, and I just incredibly blessed to have her as a resource and working for the site and all. And make sure you get on Steelers Depot today and read her work, and get on. If you're on Twitter, reach out to her on Twitter and let her know that you heard her. She gets a kick out of hearing from our listeners, and we don't have her on enough. I don't think, and hopefully we'll have her on maybe once or twice more before the actual season starts. So major kudos to Dr. Mel.
And I'll try not to hold a grudge against her. Let's cut the preseason to 2 games here. Her dogs were barking in the background in protest, I believe, in favor of me. So that's how I'm going to pretend.
Yeah, and look, she's a good friend in general too. So always try to catch up, when she comes to Vegas and all. So definitely a great resource for her.
Again, follow her at Girl Surgeon. Okay, Dave, wrapping up the show. What else did you want to talk about here?
Yeah, what do you think about the comments made by one of the PFF guys on Maurkice Pouncey here on the radio? Basically, Maurkice Pouncey is the most overrated offensive lineman of his generation. Now, I know there's probably a section of our listenership that probably would rubber stamp that.
Well, PFF's criticism of Maurkice Pouncey is not new. They've been pretty harsh on him for several years now, grading him as one of their lowest centers. Pouncey did respond to this. He says, quote, "All this hate and violence going on in the world, yet fake analysts can say this instead. Did you play football, Mr. Guru?" I don't love the "did you play football" card there from Pouncey, but more to the point of the criticism, I've always disagreed with that. I think obviously there was a snap issue last year, and I was very critical of Pouncey for that and talked about that when I think some others downplayed it. But I think Pouncey has been an excellent center for his entire career. And again, to put that in the context, which I think is worth putting in the context of that brutal surgery he had in the staph infection and how that probably should have ended his career or at least altered his career forever. And he came back as the same dude. So I think the fact he did that and he's played at such a consistent level for such a long time, going through that especially, is remarkable.
Is he the best center in the NFL? I think the answer to that is no. But is he year in, year out top? Where would you put him? Top X centers in the NFL on a year-to-year basis?
Well, again, the criticism from PFF was of his generation and of the centers of his generation of this era, let's say the last decade or so. I think he's no worse than top 5. I don't have my center ranking of the decade on hand, but at worst case scenario, he's like top 5.
I think top 5 might be pushing it a little bit for talking about a decade, wouldn't you?
Well, who else would you put ahead of him?
Oh, I'd have to pull him up as well too, and go back through kind of all the all pros as well too, which he obviously has been voted all pro.
Right.
But
and I understand some of the Pro Bowls is a little you get it once and you kind of get it forever, but yeah, I mean he's been recognized as an all pro too.
Yeah, I would go probably top 8. Right around in there. I mean, he's 8-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro selection there. Look, here's what he does well. He diagnoses at the line. At this point of his career, I think that he knows what he sees. When he sees it, I think that's a huge plus with his experience at this point. Nobody still, very few able to get out in space like he does still, move out in space. You see the Steelers like to run these pin and pulls and stuff where they ask the center to really get on the horse and go. He can still do that. He can still get out there in the second level and get things done. Pass protection. What is the weakest area of his game?
I think just overall those big hulking nose tackles that rely on pure strength can give him problems because Pouncey was never the biggest or bulkiest dude. So we've seen some guys like Haloti Ngata back in the day with Baltimore and some of these other beefy nose tackles give him some fits.
Yeah, I would say with the power in the pass rush.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But as far as run blocking goes, I mean, I'd throw him in there along with a couple others. I have no issue about that. I think it's and it's obviously in the grading there with PFF somewhere in their grading. And look, you don't have one guy consistently grading all of his games either. And the standard, and that's where the subjectivity and all comes in when you have a site like, I think, and I'll continue to say this, I think a lot of what PFF does is absolutely fantastic. And we continue to have subscriptions to their site because there's a lot of valuable information in there. Now, on a play-by-play diagnosis level, there's going to be some subjectivity and definitely some discrepancy. And look, I've caught them before, just in general breakdowns of plays of blames in coverage where I know for a fact that it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And
a screen that John Bostic was responsible for when he wasn't even close to the football.
I mean, there's been several times where I've called it on them. They've ultimately changed stuff,
Okay.
Because of things that we've broken down and called them on. So do they get it wrong? I mean, do they get it right a lot of times? Yeah, I think in general they do. But I mean, anytime you're asked to grade, something like an NFL player on a play-by-play basis, especially when you don't have the plays in front of you, there is a lot of guesswork goes on. Now, a lot of the stuff I think is easy to recognize there, but in general, just their general statement there that, overrated, or I forget what the exact term was there. What was the exact, the most overrated offensive lineman of his generation. Yeah, I think that's a little rich.
Yeah,
I think it's a lot of rich.
Yeah, I think it's very rich and just not the right take to have. But again, PFF has never been a fan of Pouncey, so I'm not surprised by that statement. All right, Dave, let's get to some reader emails and wrap up the show.
All right, let's see here. From Jay Barbati, I'd like to hear you guys discuss Cam Sutton's game against the Rams as well as view from 30,000 feet. Was watching the highlights and really stood out early on. Secondly, I've got a question guaranteed to ruffle some feathers. Looking back, would you rather have drafted Juju, Galladay, or Godwin? Personally, I love Juju as a person and for his physicality. His block on Burfict will be legend for generations. Honestly, though, in terms of talent and ceiling, I think Juju is third behind both. Both are better athletes with similar physicality. Neither have had drops like Juju had last year. Hoping Juju's issues were just growing pains with all tumultuous losing Ben, AB, and Coach Drake, but he looked out of sorts even when he had opportunities to make plays. Have a good weekend. All right. What do you remember about Cam Sutton's game against the Rams?
I can't remember anything that specific, to be honest. I'm sure if I went back through the game or some of my old notes, I could tell you something, Jay, but honestly, nothing's coming to mind off the top right now.
Me either. I'd have to go back and rewind that myself to be able to talk, to be able to just answer the question in general. I don't remember a lot of specifics about that in general, so I'd have to go back and watch that. What about the Juju, Galladay, or Godwin talk?
Well, just real quick with Sutton, I would just say overall, very impressive year. I think he improved as a more physical, aggressive tackler and run stuffer. So I think those were all positive signs, and his coverage was steady. To the second question, I understand there's really no bad answer there. I remember the Steelers had reportedly a lot of interest in Galladay. I like
Godwin. I like Godwin.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I mean him and Evans are a dynamic duo. Now you got Brady thrown to him for sure. So they're different types. Galladay, Godwin, more of the Z type. James Washington role. I mean Juju plays the Z, but he's more of that slot guy that's where he's most comfortable. So they are different stylistically receivers. I don't know how I'd rank him. I think to the point about the drops, maybe that's true. I'd have to look at the numbers, but I'm sure watching Juju every single week as opposed to seeing highlights of Galladay and Godwin makes that picture a little cloudier. You see the best of those two, and you get to see Juju's highs and lows. So I'm still rolling with Juju, though. I have no regrets about that pick.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I was high on Godwin, and I owned him in a couple of fantasy leagues last year, so I was really attentive to kind of the tape and the stats with him. Even said, look, I'm going to refuse to rank them, but I will just say this: go back to 2018 and watch what Juju did in that season. Against some good coverages with and without AB, being part of that. If the 2018 Juju is the Juju that the Steelers have in 2020, I think everybody's going to be happy.
Yeah, and I think there's a very good chance we see something very similar to that 2018 Juju.
Okay, Devin Murphy writes in, as you guys progress through the position by position discussion, I'd love to go back for a discussion regarding the quarterback position. We knew the Steelers were not going to acquire another quarterback in the draft or free agency, so you didn't talk about it at length. can you discuss what you think they could or should have done to address the position in the draft or free agency if you knew they weren't comfortable with Mason Rudolph as the backup or with Ben's recovery? Boy, that's really that's way out there hypothetical, because your opinion certainly would change if you thought they weren't comfortable with Mason Rudolph or with Ben's recovery. So to me, it's kind of a impossible hypothetical.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to say. They really didn't have a whole lot of options because of just the lack of cap flexibility that you want to invest the draft and pieces around Ben. So I don't know if there were a lot of moves for them to make to address the quarterback position this year. They don't structure contracts the way that guys like Jameis Winston and maybe even Andy Dalton got in Dallas. But I think their confidence in Rudolph better pay off. I don't share that same level of confidence they have in Mason, and I hope I'm wrong.
It's just impossible to answer this question because of knowing that they do think Ben's recovery is on track and that he potentially could be even better, and that they've said right from the end of last season that they are comfortable with Mason Rudolph. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll see how it pays off again. It is a critical year for Mason Rudolph.
Let's see here if I'm missing anything. We're getting a little bit long here, so we probably a good ending point here, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up. We will be back on Tuesday to talk about whatever else is probably not happening here in the NFL.
All right. In the meantime, thanks to Dr. Mel for joining us today. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex on Twitter at Alex_Kozora. Follow Dr. Mel on Twitter at Girl Surgeon. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and you want to donate to the cause, go to SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate button, upper right navigational bar. Also, if you want an ad-free version of SteelersDepot.com, go to the site and hit the ad-free button, upright navigational bar. And for $25 for one calendar year, a lot of people really enjoying the ad-free version of the site. We appreciate all those that donate and subscribe that way as well too. Please go to iTunes or whatever platform you use to listen to the podcast, and rate it, review it, grade it, whatever. That kind of helps, and hopefully we're meeting expectations as far as that goes as well too. With that, Alex and I will be back again on Tuesday. And as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.